talk about 13 leadership principles of Amazon, and they say that this is a primary quality for getting it hired in Amazon, and they also insist that any employees or as a culture, they said this is standard. And why we are talking about this today, it's something for me as a personal career growth, coming from a fresher and slowly scaling up. Adapting this 13 Amazon principles helped me to think or handle any task in a complete different direction, and my way of working got completely changed. So the backstory is that when I was there in the first job, and when I was trying for the next job switch, I was applying for Amazon as one of the company, and I gone through like a couple of interviews with them. Though I couldn't pass them, but this came as a document for me from them, like how to prepare for their interviews. And when going through that, that gave me a spark of thought, like, okay, am I not doing this best practices or like my way of work for these many days or these many years? At the time I was like 5 years of experience, and since I was not having none of the point, when I started adapting, that gave me like a personal career growth, and getting placed in the different companies and excel in the personal track record. So that's why I wanted to share it as part of today's session with you all, so that what is there, and not more around like what documentation they preferred, but it's completely my perspective, right? Like how I took each point from them and how it helped me in terms of transitioning or changing the way of working part. So before we do that, like what are the outputs we can expect is, you can create your own style of working by sitting and reading through the documentation and trying to do as a worksheet. After watching this session, take some like 1 to 2 hours of time to digest like what we are going through this, and try to put in your current role, like are you doing this? If not, how can we adapt it? So that exercise will help you to change your complete way of work and complete creating your own style of working part. The second point is realization. So if you're not doing right thing, or if you're not happy with the work, how can you improvise it? So that realization will kick in. You can also set your own benchmark. If you're doing a task and excelling, and you're not sure like why or where you lag, and if there is no mentor for you like to point you out like this is where you lag, but each performance review like you get stuck somewhere at the last moment, then this will access certain benchmark for you and keep on improvising it. Suits for any role. When I adapted this style, I was part of operations role, and I grew from monitoring to consultant to the cloud engineer, and now I'm expanding into the DevOps role of work. And I still put this in my radar to ensure that I have these leadership principles somewhere aligned in each day of my work, even though it's not someone like monitoring, or since I'm not working for Amazon, of course, but that helps me to scale and make progress over that. So where it all started is, so you go for applying for an interview, and in companies like Amazon or product-based companies, they try to ask questions, try to test your technical stuff, your behavioral stuff, and your leadership qualities. And one common question in all top brands or top companies is, they expect you to answer in a format of star. So it won't be always the case like, hey, have you hosted an bucket, like hosted a website in an S3 bucket? Or it won't be the option like, have you tried using Lambda to turn off the EC2 instance? Or it won't be the direct question, but it always be a scenario based question or very generalized question. And it's somehow or other way in line with this leadership principle. It's not limited to Amazon, but once you have a list or have a proper worksheet, that gives you high confidence like to face any interviews, or like shout out your voice that you are following the proper standard. And the approach or the framework to approach is something called as STAR. And so that's roughly translates into situation, task, action, and so we'll go one by one, each wording they're mapping to. So before adapting to any of the leadership principles, right? So totally 13 leadership principles they're focusing here. And so before picking of any of the leadership principles and trying to adapt it, so they ask like what situation you are there. So am I doing a automation part, or I'm doing some repeated work, or I'm lagging in performance, or what is the difficulty your team faces it? So that will be the situation you need to write down. So you can create a Excel format and try to list down as a star, and then try to fill out like what is your situation and things over there. That situation can be like, I'm an operations engineer, or I'm a DevOps engineer and doing the specific task repeatedly. And then what would be the task you are doing for that? It can be like monitoring a dashboard, or going to each server and fetching the logs. It can be any task that you are doing as part of the situation. And then comes the action part. So to overcome the situation or to overcome the task, what action you stepped in, and after implementing that specific action from your end, what was the end result you faced it. So it can be of boosting the performance of the server like 10% as a result, or your overall ticket count reduced into like 2 or 3 counts, or it can be like you are performing a task for like 3 days of work being reduced into like 1 hour of work, depends on it. So that's generally the pattern they recommend. Like you start with the situation, what is the situation, what is the task you are implementing, and what action you perform to overcome that, and what is the result of it. So you can see each leadership principles what they recommend and try to fill in the task which you already completed from your end, or there can be other part that you haven't done on that but you try to adapt it. So we'll go to the principles one by one. And so this principle is not like roughly I'm going to read out or translating it. It's like how I consume the the leadership principles and how I implement it in my personal work, and how is the improvisation part. So that's going to be all about today's part. It's just the part like how they want to solve, and it's just Amazon statement. You can go and read that part. So the first one they talk about is the customer obsession, right? So they want to say that the customer needs to be the priority, and they want to gain trust and attention to competitors. So not everyone places a front facing role for customers, right? Okay, I'm not an UI UX designer, or I'm not playing a front end role. My role is at the back end part, which I don't need to much worry about the customers part, right? But in organization, customers is not always your end company's customer. It can be also your team's customer. So when I say team's customer on roles like DevOps or cloud engineer, you are building a solution which will be consumed by the end teams. It can be a developer team who consumes your Lambda module to spin up the Lambda instances and host the application point, or it can be the reliability team who would be relying on your alarms which you created out of it and going to consume your work. So basically, it's not always the consumer of the company, but it also translates the consumer of your work, or who the other teams who are relying on your daily task, right? So always try to see like if I do this work, and will it impact, or can it optimized in any way. Your team is acting as a blocker for the other teams. So can I automate it and give leverage that specific task to the team so that they can focus without me acting as a blocker or creating a dependency part. So that comes more around the customer obsession part. Your company is adapting Terraform for automation rather creating just resource block for each team. You can try to go in depth of creating a modules for Terraform and then hand over to the team so that they can do it. Or you can spin up GitHub actions so that they can just pass the relevant variable values for their expected output. So even though there is not a direct ask from the end team, but think in a way if you can offload this to your team's consumers, and if that can unblock them, so that what I call it as customer obsession. What needs them and what's your team can help them for the other consumers of your work. The next one we talk about is the ownership. So in service-based companies, when I worked in the past, there used to be a saying that, hey, act fast, the ball is in our court, or just reply them so that the ball goes to their court and we have time, getting them. Or there are saying that, hey, I'm working on 3 phases and only 2 is my responsibility, and the third one is not my job, so that I don't need to worry about other part of work. But when we talk about ownership, it should not limit within my scope of work or my team's work. It should be like an organization role, and if for the wider project, if your contribution is going to be act as a bit of portion, then you try to take the ownership of other pieces as well. You don't need to completely run the show for the other pieces, but try to have some glance or idea like what piece is getting over there, and at least to answer the basic questions like what work they are doing it, and can you optimize it further on the piece of your work. So for example, again I'm taking an example of Terraform, right, or the infra code. Maybe that the Lambda responsibility or creation of Lambda can be that the third party developer's role, but you can take the ownership to create a module and help them getting it benefit to improvise the performance part. Also, you don't need to play a political game, so you can ask more details at one front and then try to get that sorted and give a clear clarification to them. So that comes more as part of the ownership, like how you can not play the political game, or not worrying about this ticket is what allocated to me and I don't need to worry about other tickets or other tasks which is running around me. So that's something you need to consider acting as a ownership part. The third one they talk about is inventing and simplify. So when we talk about invent and simplify, we generally talk about okay, in my company we always go with Python, or we always go with this specific services. But in general, no one asks us like, okay, we are doing in Python, is there any limitation in Python? So we go and adapt to some XYZ other coding language that can benefit in terms of runtime. For example, if you adapt Node.js, you can use asynchronous function in it. Or same way, like if your company is adapting Terraform just with resource block and running it locally, no one comes and asks you like, can we simplify it further to run it in a pipeline? So if you're in that position where you are doing repeated tasks or not industrial standard practices, then generally you would need to invent or simplify the hurdle that you are facing. So generally you can easily identify this. Like for example, if a code is running like 30 minutes, 45 minutes for a task, and that's a scope of improvement. Or if you get a regular ticket, for example, user password reset, for instance, then people say like all I'm doing is like doing an user password reset for entire tenure of like half of the work. Then you need to go and invent and simplify. Can you automate that process and do simplify this? So that's where you will find it, like rather worrying like, am I doing it the more repeated work or the boring work? But try to invent and simplify further the job role which you play. So this one, they talks about like leaders are right a lot. So this can be like from the fresher perspective, right? Like what if I go wrong, or am I not a right leader? But how I take this an approach is that the leaders are generally like right a lot. They know, are they right or are they not right, or they are doubtful. So whenever we declare a statement, or whenever proposing a solution, we can always ensure passing the right expectation to the end team, that I suspect or I believe this is a solution, or like I'm not sure about this, but we can try this out. So those kind of wordings you can always add. If you're 100% sure, if you have already worked on a project, you know that this is the output, then you can give a command statement that I have done this and this is how it behaves. And also try to accept if you're somewhere wrong. There can be scenarios like we go with confident, but then after the meeting ends, we realize like what we mentioned is something wrong or like 100% accurate. Then rather trying to cover up, we can be brutally honest and say that, hey, this is what happened and this is what I believed, but unfortunately this is the scenario. So that helps us to like gain trust and be helpful in terms of acting as a leader at the first role. Curious. So when I say learn and be curious, try to start learning from what the tooling, what technology you are using at first place. If you're using a Terraform, if you're using a GitHub Actions, if you're using AWS, if you're using any services, try to learn that first, rather than just in most of the companies you have a step-by-step guide, like you go here, click this, or you have a program to execute it, task. But then try to learn the concept so that there will be some scope of optimization, and try to do a mini POC out of it. POC is something like proof of concept. So try to do it on the non-prod account or on your side as well, and then try to showcase this can be improved in this way, so that you don't need to say that, okay, there is no project to start from scratch, or there is no module to work on it. If there's an existing code, you can also try to do some writing the test cases. So that's what comes from like learn and be curious. You have an existing system, what you can learn, what you can optimize and do further on it. So to showcase, like there were, in my case, there were like GitHub Actions, and we were using it as an workflow part. But then there was a concept in GitHub Actions for a matrix way of concept, which is like you write one and that's going to do a for loop for you, which is like rather than like writing 5 workflow, you write a single matrix and that's going to create a 5 workflow for it. So though we were using GitHub Actions for like days and days, years and years, unless we spend time on learning and being curious, we couldn't optimize it further on that. So yeah, so that act as an example of how you can learn and be curious in that scenario. Hire and develop the best. You don't need to be in playing a hiring role. Obviously you won't be like at initial stage of career, but what you can do is you can develop the best. The one of the mistake people do in initial career is like they try to create a dependency. They want everyone to say that, hey, for this specific task go to XYZ person, right? And they want to be that specific person, which means you are going to act as a bottleneck for your team. And if that specific task to be done during the non-office hours, and if you are not on-call person for the specific week, you are going to be called, which means your work-life balance is going to get affected. This also means that your time is reserved for the specific action, right? So though you have a dependency, but people can easily get replaced you. So if you want a growth in terms of career, and you want to have a better work-life balance, is something you need to do is try not to create a dependency for yourself. You can create a dependency in terms of your way of working, your knowledge adapting speed, but not in a way of not knowledge sharing and be a single person for running the show. So in case if you are in that situation, try to see like how you can offload that knowledge to the team so that in return you can gain the knowledge from others what they're working on. So in instance, if a team is working on 3 different tasks and you are the go-to person for task 1, then you can cross skill with the person who is doing task 2, so that both learn and cross skill together in the personal career growth. Insist on the higher standards, so there is always room for improvement. If you are working on a programming language, you might be using variables but not following the standards of variables. So always try to look at higher standards, like how can you set standard, and if you're going to go big, or if someone is going to consume your work, then will it be like, try to think in terms of 360 angle rather than just getting a ticket and working on that part. So that's where comes on insist on higher standards. And sometimes it's okay to delay the work. When I say okay to delay, like if you're going to complete the work in 1 week, but if you can take another 2 weeks to complete with higher standards, then try to argue for that, like this is why we want to do this, and put it in front of desk to the higher level management, so that if it accepted, then you have the higher chance to set your higher standards in your work. So thinking big, so this is something, start with POC, but always try to see in long run, right? So for example, if you're starting a single work of Lambda creation as part of manually, okay, this is just like going to take like a couple of minutes for me, so I go there and create it manually. But then think big, if that is going to be a BAU task, like business as usual, like going to task for your team, and you're going to start getting like hundreds or thousands of tickets for each team to create Lambda, then even though it's a first task, so small at the initial level, but you are creating a bottleneck for your team for the entire coming ahead, and that's going to start as a benchmark. People will question like why it's done in this way, referring the ticket number, but why I can't do this, or like why this team is doing in this way, and why this can't be done, because once a system into the production, we can't change how it is. So always, whenever before pushing anything into production, always think big in terms of long term impact and a wider impact across the team, so that any future members don't come and curse you, like who the hell did this, or there are companies like people don't want to go there and work. It's all because the previous decisions made, right, not following the best practice or the work culture being set. So set a proper trend for the upcoming people for your company or for your team. So bias for action, so when I say like you need to take time and do it, but then speed also matters, right? So we can't push back for each and every decisions, like we need time. There are also like speed, we need to do it in terms of taking decision or adapting this technology, or doing a rollout. In my case, what I do is like I don't go for production unless there's a rollback plan. So that, because generally like we assume everything to be a positive scenario, but there won't be any negative scenario, it's part of the plan. But then once we go into production, if something we want to roll back, then we think about like how to do it, or other complications, like this will impact application A, application B, application C. So to do that, this should be set as part of your plan in terms of like what is a rollback plan, and if you want to expand into like a wider level, then can it scale up to an extent. So try to set up a framework for your own work. The previous past can be a learning. Try to get the feedback, I have done this and these are the impact created, can I optimize it further in the upcoming work. So that's where it comes as part of the bias for action. The next one in terms of frugality. So frugality is like, as of today, I was telling about creating a Lambda in the console manually, right? So you might be starting initially like creation of 1 Lambda, 2 Lambda per week. But then if the developer team's adapting more AWS technology, then you might be need to create more, IAM roles specific to that, and your team is going to be act as a blocker. So then try to, you can't keep on hiring just for the same automation task is going to scale in a higher level. So rather scaling up the team, try to see how you can optimize it further, or how can you automate it, or how can you streamline the work. If you take top companies like for example Netflix, the DevOps team, it's run by a 6 members team. So the 6 members team is running the entire company. So when it comes to cloud architecture and any role, right, so any application specific, it's generally run by like 3 or 4 members of team. So always, rather blaming that we are running out of resource, try to think can we optimize this further, or where the entire team's time is going and spent, so that we can optimize it more further. It can be done either by aligning at the wider level organization, like this is our focus, so we'll pick this one only, or this is where our time is spent most. So as part of the next initiative for our team, we'll work on this automation, which will give us more time, or more flexibility for the end team. So you think in terms of frugality is more around like, rather complaining of resource, think about how can we adapt automation. And this will also bring in the previous points which mentioned like you should not always just think about what having in hand, but also what you can bring in by learning and uh, more becoming an expert around that part. So next we have earn trust. So earn trust is not just about giving a declaration part or always being right, or also like accepting the mistake or anything done. The earn trust is also means in my case it's about like listening to others and letting them speak. And you might be having a path to reach to the end destination, and the other person might be also having the path to reach the same destination, just that the path might be different. Rather than going into the argument mode or always getting into like I'm always right mode, you can try to bring everyone into the same page. Things you can do is like more whiteboarding. There are toolings available like Miro, right? Or you might be having Draw.io, so that try to picturize it, try to document it, try to put them into the statement and read them, and then try to see each pros and cons of the statement, and then try to set a benchmark around that. So it's not always that what I am proposing that should be right to gain the trust. It can be also the gaining trust is that what others are saying and what is best for the current scenario and what is best for the company. So that's what mostly comes when it comes to earning the trust. Dive deep. So again, this is something more relevant to like the previous point discussion. It's more around deep at multiple levels, connecting with the other teams or other tasks at more interval. And you might not be the expert of the other team's activity, but at least you can ask how, what they are doing, and try to become an one. And so that you keep learning and in the plays a vital role, right? So the art of saying no. So when we say about art of saying no, like we agree to a specific commitment, but then if someone comes and says that this is a priority, we can't just keep switching our focus or priority. At the end of the uh, reviews, it can look like what we committed it's not delivered. But if you're focusing your priority for the other teams or other needs, they will get the highlight part, right? Because their OKRs or their initiatives will be completed with the help of it. And so always try to see the when it comes to planning, do you have the bandwidth and what you are planning, and if there is going to be dependency of other teams, then try to uh, keep a buffer point in terms of planning. So generally we do, there are like multiple ways to handle it. There are something like agile mechanism or scrum master part, where you can adopt any of the planning part and then scope it out and then stick to that goal and be ready to say no to the any ad hoc request that comes into the picture. So at the end of the day, it's going to be like delivering of the results. Stick to that. And then if there is any deviation or you see any delay on it, try to flag right away, right? Rather than waiting till the end day or closer timeline and then saying that, hey, we got delayed due to team X or team B. Rather doing that, shout it out loud to the entire company so that others know that you are facing a delay or you are having a setbacks, you are having a blocker, so that someone around can help you out if it matters most. I think this is more around try to be the Earth's best employer. I'm not sure about this. In my role, I haven't played much on it, but how I take it in this way is that am I also sharing a peers knowledge, like what I have in what I'm learning or what my expertise, or everyone there is in the same page, and am I not? I'm ensuring that I'm not acting as a bottleneck for a team, so that everyone works together and everyone grows together as part of a company and organization. Yeah. So this will be the last one, right? So it's more around like how Amazon scaled, right? From the garage, you need to be always, capable with the responsibilities and stuff. But you can also start from a fresher and then adapt and learn and grow and become a leader one day. So this is 13th principle, but I see more of a motivation part to start from scratch. Any new challenge, anything that's something completely I'm unaware about it. And yeah, so this is totally of the 13 leadership principles. When I came across this, it was like more of a wow factor. And when I start writing in an Excel format of like scenario based things, when I was preparing for it, I couldn't even write 1 or 2 points for each thing, right? I was struggling or stumbling when I started adapting into the work part of the same work which I was doing. So that was a game changer for my personal career growth. So I thought of this with you all, so that if you are also in a similar situation, or if you're also thinking a similar mindset, or if you're attending any interviews, or if you want to excel, then this can act as a guide. Because generally people go and read the points and then say like, okay, what is what and what I can do. I'm not in a hiring mode, or I'm not in a position to say no, or people always look in a lens of a negative aspect. So I want to put a positive on that, that it's not a role matters, it's always there's a scope of it. And yeah, so in case if you stuck somewhere and if you want to need a one-to-one mentorship, then I will leave a top mate link also, so that you can book a slot and then you can discuss how you can adapt these principles in your current work or current career path. Right. So yeah, that's mostly today. Any doubts, any queries, any suggestions?